is November 12th, 2023, and it is a beautiful day here in Florida and Clearwater. We appreciate all of you coming as we welcome our next guest. As you all know, Baha'i Explorations on Sundays occurs so that we can all get access to amazing new information, stuff we don't know about, and history that we should remember that will invigorate us as we move ahead. With that being said, today's topic is More Than Money, contributions of Hand of the Cause, Amelia Collins. The monetary contributions by Hand of the Cause, Amelia Collins, are generally well known. This presentation aims to focus on Millie's services in the teaching and administrative areas, and how she manifested what the beloved guardian called her exemplary devotion and her strenuous exertions to promote the manifold interests of a far-flung faith. Now, this is cited from Shoghi Effendi to the NSA, the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States and Canada. It's an undated excerpt copied by Amelia Collins. It's under the U.S. Baha'i National Archives. With that being said, our speaker today is Professor Dr. Nancy Lee Harper. Nancy Lee Harper became a Baha'i in Austin, Texas in 1969, and since then, she has pioneered to Argentina between 1975 to 1977 with her husband, Baron Harper, and with their children, and later to Portugal between 1992 and 2013. Retiring from the Universidade de Aveiro, Portugal, where she was head of piano, she now lives near family in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Professionally, Nancy is a classical pianist and educator who has performed and taught on 4 continents and in 29 countries, including the Juilliard School and Eastman School of Music. Her music may be heard on YouTube, iTunes, Apple Music, SoundCloud, 9 Star Media, and Spotify. Dr. Harper is also author of more than 250 articles, translated into 6 languages, and several books on such topics as Iberian music, piano pedagogy, music and medicine, and Baha'i academics. You can, for example, go to Baha'iTeachings.org or visit the Willamette Institute. She is listed in the Marquis Who's Who and American Keyboard Artists and was nominated for the Sammy Housenpoor Excellence in the Arts Prize from Belgium in 2026. 2006, guys. 2026 has not come yet. We're like 3 years away from that. So 2006. She is completing a biography of Hand of the Cause, Amelia Collins, and she is preparing new recordings, one by the British Baha'i composer Malcolm Dedman, and Dakota Classics. For more information, if you want to learn more about Nancy Lee Harper, please see www.nancyleeharper.com. I'm going to spell it out for everyone. www.nancy, Lee, Lee, Harper, HARPER.com. Without much further ado, welcome, Nancy. We're so happy to have you and begin this discussion. For all of you on the Zoom, please see the link in the chat. Welcome, Nancy. How are you today? I understand it's not as sunny over there?
Not at all. Not in Canada. Yes, it's November. We can predict the rain, for which we're grateful because it's drying out.
Ooh, but it's beautiful though, right?
It is beautiful
beautiful
here.
waters.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The mountains, everything very beautiful. Yeah.
Lovely.
And the leaves are still quite impressive with green and gold and red. So lots of variety.
Colors of fall.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So I am so honored to be with you. Thank you, John, and thank you, Jeremiah. I wish to warmly thank Peter Terry, Violetta Zine, John Piltz, Jeremiah Adams, all of the Clearwater, Florida Baha'is, and everyone who assisted in making this presentation possible today. Special thanks goes to the United States National Baha'i Archives, in particular Ed Sevcik, Roger Dahl, Louis Walker and his staff, to the Baha'i World Center, to Mr. Hooper Dunbar, to Mark Liasia of the St. Louis Concordia Historical Institute, to Cindy Neubrother and Pamela Groff, to Dr. Dwayne Troxel, to Klaus Harry Liedke, Alexander Meinhardt, Catherine Judd Hoggeson, and my husband, Baron Harper, who initially suggested the need for such a biography on Amelia Collins. It was in, let's see, do we have the PowerPoint showing before I go on? Yes, thank you. It was in 2015, with the blessings and prayers of the Universal House of Justice, that I began an exhaustive search on the life and the service of Hand of the Cause Amelia Collins. This work is culminating in a comprehensive biography, and what is presented today is only a small portion of my findings. In the next slide, we will see what we will cover today. Slide 2, please. Thank you. It is well known that Amelia, or Millie, as she was known to everyone, was a wealthy benefactress of the Baha'i faith. Almost everywhere one can go in the Baha'i world, you can see touches of her financial generosity, from temple and Hazira lands to the funding of publications and literature, to deputizing pioneers, to assisting in building teaching facilities and administrative institutions, and to contributing to the development of the Baha'i World Center. These multifarious means are not the focus of today's presentation. Rather, a look at her immense services of more than money will be covered. These topics are on becoming a hand of the cause of God, a biographical introduction up to 1919, which will cover her becoming a Baha'i, her activities in what we call today the core activities, her teaching work, her service as emissary for the Guardian, and her services as speaker and writing. Then we will close and have a question and answer period. Next slide, please. On becoming a hand of the cause, I'm sure that Millie was absolutely stunned to receive a cable from The Guardian on 26 November 1946, which read, "Your magnificent international services, exemplary devotion, and now the signal service impel me inform you your elevation rank and cause Baha'u'llah. You are first be told this honor in lifetime. As to time announcement, leave it my discretion." Next slide, please. We don't know what Millie thought, but we will find out a little bit more at the end of the presentation what she must have written to the Guardian and how he replied. Millie was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on Saturday, 7 June 1873 to Conrad and Catherine Engelder. On the left of this slide, you see Pittsburgh around that time, 1872, its development a few years later, and then the church where her father pastored. Conrad was an ordained Lutheran minister. And this, curiously enough, this church is still in operation with a very dwindling congregation. It was established in 1868, excuse me. And up until 1920, services were given in German. So I believe they're now in English. We can go on now to the next slide, please. Millie, as you know, was born into a large family of 14 children. She was the middle, the seventh. She had 3 siblings who did not survive into adulthood. On the left is a picture of her father during his seminary years. On the right, in the middle, is her mother in later years. And on the right are almost all of her siblings. There's just one missing, Bertha, and of course, Millie herself is not in the picture. I'm sorry, but I don't have the date of this photo. It comes from a family album of which I was privileged to receive. The back row is Otto, who is a banker. Next to him is Albert, who is a bookkeeper, sometimes a printer painter. He was an entrepreneur. Clara, housewife. Next to Clara is Theodore, the theologian who taught at the seminary. Then is Henrietta, also a housewife. Conrad Jr. is next to her. He was also a minister. And on the end is Arthur, a mining accountant. On the front row is Carl, a chemist professor. And next to him is Oscar, who was also in the mining business. Next slide, please. Exactly how Millie and Thomas Hodgson Collins was her husband's name, how they met is not really completely documented. There are two stories, and they both could be true. Both of them say they met in Michigan. Why would Millie be in Michigan when she was born in Pennsylvania? Well, apparently Conrad Jr. had gone there to minister, although that church is no longer there. And one story is that she was a housekeeper to her brother. Another story is that she was on holiday in Copper Harbor and they met there. So both stories could actually be true. We just don't know the date. I think it would be around 1891 or so, 92 perhaps. So on the left is Millie, probably what she looked like when she met Tom. He was always called Tom. And in their married years, again, I don't have the exact date of all these photos. The one in the center, I believe, must be in their Massachusetts home. You can see they had a little dog. And then this is kind of an official photo of Thomas Collins. He was quite respected in the mining business. I think it's rather interesting how similar in some aspects Tom and Conrad Sr. are, Millie's father. So it's not just their hairstyle, but a little bit of their appearance as well. So Tom had an interesting upbringing. You know, a lot of times out of hardship, great things can come. And so he lost his father when he was quite young. His mother, Dolly, had two sons. Thomas was the older, and then there was Edwin. And age 41, their father died of a heart attack. So there was heart disease in the family. And that forced then Dolly to go and be near her brothers in Michigan who were miners. So they then undertook to put both Tom and his brother Edwin through mining college. And that's how he got his training. All right, next, please. Oh, sorry, just a minute before you go on. You'll see the marriage application at the top left of this screen. It was actually Millie's father who married them in Hannahstown, Pennsylvania. So Millie was 21 when she married. Tom was 23. They had never been married before. They remained married for 43 years almost. Okay, now the next slide. Thank you. So around the turn of the century, around 1900, maybe just a little before, Tom and his relatives went to Bisbee, Arizona. They were already working in the mining business in Michigan. And of course, you know, there was a lot of money to be made by all of these undiscovered riches in the Southwest. Arizona was not yet a state, it was a territory. And so they ended up in the Bisbee area. You can see how primitive it looks. I will read to you how Millie described this in old age. She said around 1900, they moved from Calumet, Michigan to Bisbee. And she described Bisbee as a typical mining camp in those days. A dirt road ran through the middle of town with boards to enter the rickety and noisy saloons that lined the road, and a path up to Quality Hill to the little house that was their own. As you can see, Quality Hill is on the right, upper right of your screen. That summer, they lived with only the water they could buy from the Mexicans who brought it to them in skin sacks carried on the backs of burros. There was no ice, of course, until the town built an ice house and water tanks several years later. The old country store, and I assume that that's it in the picture on your right, lower right. The old country store was the center of everything. A burro brought in wilted fruit and vegetables from the border once a week. And the day the proprietor butchered, the few women of the town gathered around to chat and wait for their particular hunk of meat. Millie would say later, I was as safe walking past those saloons as any lady on Park Avenue. Rowdy and dirty as those miners were, they were all gentlemen. And I remember getting in an old buckboard and going with my husband to the site of the new town, Douglas. Then it was nothing more than 2 tents in the middle of a desert. This town literally grew up overnight right around those mines. Turquoise was also plentiful in Bisbee, and hence the term Bisbee blue. I would imagine that Millie owned a bit of that. This newfound wealth enabled them to travel around the world. They made several around the world trips. They were socialized as much as they could be. And you'll see a copy of the first, which I think is the first passport issued to Tom there in the middle. Okay, next slide. These are 2 photos from family members. And it shows on the left a very happy time, I would say, with Dolly, the mother of Tom and Edwin. Just behind her is Millie, then Tom, then Edith, and then Edwin. They all look quite happy and jolly. On the right is a bit more somber, I would say. Maybe it's colder. 1913 Duluth at Edwin's home with his little boy Emmons is in Tom's arms. And Millie is looking very wistfully at Lawrence, the baby that was just been born the preceding year, or a few months earlier. This became, I suppose, a big issue between the couple, that they remained childless, and it's clear that she loved children. Next slide, please. For some reason, they ended up in Massachusetts. There are several reasons this could have happened. It could have been because they wanted to be near better medical care. Maybe they did want a child, and they were in Princeton, Massachusetts on a farm, but it was not so far from Boston where they could have gotten good medical care. Another reason could have been business dealings for Tom, but at any rate, they bought a so-called farm of 32 acres, and there was one house on it. It's the house that you see in the lower left. And Millie actually had this house moved up to a different part of the property, and then they built the large house that you see in the center. These, the garage down below, these were it was this carriage house. I'm sure the smaller house then was for caretakers. And this whole house has been sort of maintained as a museum, if you will. It went on the Princeton Historical Commission list. And so you can see that they have put a plaque on the property to say it was Thomas and Amelia Collins' house. So that's a nice touch. Millie loved the farm. She was very frugal. They had fruit trees, she canned, and she wanted to spend her entire life there. Unfortunately, Tom did not. And this caused a bit of a problem. He hated the winters. He much preferred California. And around 1918, we can go to the next slide now. He decided to serve in World War I. He was too old for the draft, so he volunteered along with some of his mining buddies. And they went to work for the American Red Cross in Paris. After a year, he came home and said to Millie he wanted a divorce and that he'd fallen in love with the nurse. And she was in absolute agony over this. She refused to give him a divorce. She did a lot of soul searching, and even from her Lutheran background in the Bible, she knew that divorce was not a good thing. So Tom became furious, and he told Millie, I'll make sure that you get as little as the law allows. But you know, Millie was very savvy. That Ackendune property, Ackendune meaning a house on a hill, which is Scottish, she owned the property, and this may be for reasons of taxation, because in 1913, IRS tax revenue had come into being. So Anyway, she would have had that property even if Tom had followed through with his threat. We don't know exactly when Millie heard of the Baha'i faith, but I surmise that it was in Arizona when Nellie French had become a Baha'i with her mother in Chicago through Ibrahim Kerala. But at the time that Millie was with her there, Nellie had become really not very interested in the faith because of Kerala's actions. And it's a time then in 1919 that on the East Coast, Millie would have probably, well, she for sure encountered other Baha'is. Some of these would have been Harlan and Grace Ober, Mother Beecher, Elizabeth Greenleaf, Florence Morton, who lived not so far from the Collinses in Massachusetts. She was a wealthy Baha'i businesswoman. So Millie, in her own words, said that two people helped her through this difficult period. One was Frank Ashton, the husband of Beatrice Ashton, who wrote Millie's In Memorial in volume 13 of the Baha'i World. And she said, Frank oh so greatly and lovingly helped me on my way when I was in such throes as only Abdu'l-Baha knew. And Millie, of course, the other person was Nellie French. And Millie went on to say, before I went to Greenacre that memorial time, that memorable time, and that's probably the summer of 1918, Mrs. French urged me to write to Abdu'l-Baha. I said, why? When he knows all. But to satisfy her, I wrote these words only. Dear Master, thou seest my heart and knowest what I need. In a few days, I went to Greenacre and found that from that time on, I have been lovingly led step by step toward the kingdom. And then, at the request of the Obers, the following year, Abdu'l-Baha revealed my tablet, and I knew nothing of it until it came. On the night of December 6th, I wrote a long letter to our Lord, but destroyed it the following day. About 6 weeks afterwards, my tablet came, and it is dated December 6th. I never saw him with my bodily eyes, but I knew what he expects of me and how I fail. So my husband is going to read the tablet that Abdu'l-Baha revealed for Millie. It is dated December 6, 1919.
To the maidservant of God, Mrs. Collins, in care His Honor Mr. Harlan F. Ober, Boston, Massachusetts, USA. Upon her be Baha'u'llah el-Abha. He is God. O thou Lady of the Kingdom, praise thou God that in this century, the century of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, thou hast been awakened, hast been made aware of the manifestation of the Lord of hosts. All the people of the world are buried in the graves of nature, or are slumbering, heedless and unaware. Just as His Holiness Christ says, I may come when you are not aware. The coming of the Son of Man is like the coming of a thief into a house, the owner of which is utterly unaware. In brief, from the bounties of His Holiness Baha'u'llah, my hope is that thou mayest daily advance in the kingdom, that thou mayest become a heavenly angel, confirmed by the breaths of the Holy Spirit, and may erect a structure that shall eternally remain firm and unshakable. The contribution thou hast given for the propagation of the lights of the kingdom has been highly acceptable, and the Committee on Teaching in America will expend this sum for teaching the cause of God. Convey on my behalf to thy respected husband respectful greetings and say to him, these days are very precious. Grasp the present opportunity and ignite a candle that shall never be extinguished and which shall pour out its light eternally and illumine the world of mankind. Upon thee be Baha'u'llah el-Abha, signed Abdul Baha, translated by Shoghi Rabbani, Haifa, Palestine, December 6, 1919.
Thank you. So this was Millie's first contact with Shoghi Effendi. So it's interesting in the tablet from Abdul Baha that he not only addresses her, but her husband. She had requested from Abdul Baha a pilgrimage for the spring of 1922, but of course, with his passing in November 1921, it did not take place. She was granted a pilgrimage in the spring, in March of 1923. And it was at this time that she met the guardian. And I'll just give you a brief description of how she reacted. Once she said that the very first time she saw that divine countenance and beheld those beautiful and expressive eyes, so full of eagerness and expectation, she realized that the divine youth was surrounded by many insurmountable hardships and sorrows. You know, I never had the joy of having a child. Therefore, in my heart and soul, I adopted him as my own son, and in the world of faith and spirit enthroned him on the throne of certitude, where he reigned as the sole sovereign of my soul, the ruler of my destiny, and the fashioner of my life. In whatever direction he willed, I would go with the utmost joy and assurance. You have on this slide pictures then of her pilgrimage. I'm sorry, I'm not able to identify everybody today, but you see on the right photo lower left that Millie is with Fujita. Okay. And of course, in the upper is Shoghi Effendi with the greatest holy leaf. It was a thrill, her first pilgrimage, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, shall we go to the next slide, please? Oh, I'm sorry. There's something missing here. No, this is correct. Okay, I bet you didn't know that Millie taught children's classes. We'll go to her services now. And she was thrilled with these children. Again, they help fulfill that ache of hers to have a child. So when she knew that she would have her first pilgrimage, she asked the children to all write letters to Shoghi Effendi. There were 8 children in that group, 5 boys and 3 girls. And so they all wrote letters, and they were going to form a club, but they needed a name. And this is one of the things they asked the guardian. The guardian, in his sweetness, took time to answer these letters collectively and to send them a small gift. I'll read you a portion of his letter. My dearly beloved brethren and sisters in Abdul Baha, your sweet messages of love and greetings, transmitted through the kindness of our beloved Baha'i sister, Mrs. Collins, have deeply touched my heart and have strengthened my hope and confidence in the great service which the Baha'i youth will render in future to the cause of Baha'u'llah. I very strongly urge you to devote your time to a very serious and profound study of the history of the cause and of the various writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. The study of the cause and its teachings and the daily endeavor to exemplify its spirit in our dealings with our fellow men are the most essential obligations of all Baha'is, whether young or old, who aspire to see this divine message spread throughout the world. As to a name for your club, Baha'i Fellowship seems to be the best reminder of the spirit that must animate continually its members in the work, service to mankind. So he signs it, I am your devoted brother, Shoghi March 18th, 1923. Next slide, please. Millie was very devoted to the youth. And when she became not only a hand, but the vice president of the International Baha'i Council in 1951, she wrote a long article to encourage them. This is published in the American Baha'i Youth Volume 2, number 3, September 1951. In this, she speaks of the youth who have arisen to assist the faith, including the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, Qudus, Mullah Hussein, Shoghi Effendi. And then she quotes from Advent of Divine Justice. I think her opening paragraph is very revealing for us today even, for she says to the youth, "A great heritage, the greatest in the history of the world, awaits the youth of today. But while the youth of the world are moving forward blindly, often despairingly and cynically, the Baha'i youth are not working in the dark. Their path is clearly outlined. They can read and understand the promises in the sacred scriptures. They have the inestimable treasure of the covenant for their guidance and protection, and they have the divine pattern to follow. They know what to do. Theirs is the greatest opportunity and the greatest responsibility ever given to youth. For while the world is in chaos and is going to pieces all around them, they are in the vanguard of the builders of the world order of Baha'u'llah." On the left, you will see Millie's assistant in Germany, Klaus Liedecker. He goes by Harry now. He was a youth serving her, and he sent me a couple of really delicious stories. On the right, you will see the Esslingen Summer School, also from the same year. Harry is there in the front row. I'm wondering if you can identify the person on the far left front. The young man with glasses. Any idea who he is, who he grew up to be? He grew up to be a Universal House of Justice member. Ian Simple. Yeah. So Harry tells us, it's just really a lovely story. So he was serving her that summer in Germany. He said, "It was an extremely hot day, and Mrs. Collins wished to return to her hotel at Bad Homburg near Frankfurt to rest up. 'Can I offer you a beer?' she asked. 'Certainly, Mrs. Collins,' was my reply. 'I don't normally touch this stuff, but if you would like to have a German beer, I'll keep you company.' She was a small person and wore sparkling glasses, which added to her smile and made her look like Miss Marple in the Agatha Christie thrillers. 'I just wanted to test the German Baha'i youth,' she confessed. You will remember that Shoghi Effendi had requested no alcohol from 1935. Then a tuxedo young waiter appeared, and she ordered in her best German, 'Ich möchte heißen Kaffee und heißen Milch, bitte.' 'I would like to have hot coffee and hot milk, please.' I ordered the same. The waiter returned with a large silver tray that bore a silver coffee carafe, creamer, and sugar bowl. She immediately stretched out to test the coffee carafe. 'Ich sagte heißen Kaffee und heißen Milch, bitte.' I said hot coffee and hot milk, please. The waiter apologized and took everything back to the kitchen. He had a big smile when he returned. This time, the coffee seemed to her satisfaction, but when she touched the creamer, 'Ich sagte heißen Kaffee und heißen Milch, bitte,' she complained in a loud voice. The young waiter was shattered and took everything away for a third try. 'Am I embarrassing you?' she asked me sweetly. 'Well, perhaps a little,' was my honest answer. 'Don't be embarrassed,' she corrected me with emphasis. 'I am just giving this young man an opportunity to do his job right.' Next slide, please. It goes without saying that devotionals and study were an enormous part of Millie's life. In Pasadena, she had joined with Nellie French to hold public meetings once a week. In the Holy Land, she said they were so busy they almost didn't have time to pray. The subjects of their study, of course, would have been the Holy Text and the Guardian's letters. Millie herself learned from Janabi Faisal and others for many of the profound meanings of the Holy Text. She had a thirst for deepening in spiritual matters. She gives an example of some of their activity. We had a large turnout in Los Angeles last week, a spiritual meeting for friends only. I ventured to read them Shoghi Effendi's instructions, showing first by the Holy Will, meaning Abdul Baha's will, how infallible his instructions were. And then Mrs. Morton, Florence Morton, the NSA treasurer, followed with Treasury reports, and it was a very satisfactory meeting, even though I am sure I read them quite a lot of the letters. I saw that the friends had not studied the letters fully, so I at once set one night a week in our rooms to study the will and Shoghi Effendi's letters. I pray that I may be given wisdom to do this work. Next slide, please. It's very interesting that in all the administrative work that Millie accomplished, two things for me stand out about the qualities she brought to this work. Shoghi Effendi admired her calm sanity. She was a very practical woman. She grew up with all those children, so she knew how to handle people. And Imogene Hogue, who was brought by Shoghi Effendi to Geneva to head the International Baha'i Bureau, said that Millie brought a really fine spiritual balance to the NSA. You can see how many men there are. This is a picture of Millie with Dorothy Baker. Other members are George Latimer, Horace Hawley, Roy Wilhelm, the two women, Millie and Dorothy. Alan McDaniel, Louis Gregory, and of course, Leroy Iowis. Missing from this picture is Fred Schopflocker, who lived in Canada. So the two, there was one NSA for the two at that time. She was not present, apparently. So it goes without saying that she served on LSAs. A lot of her activity was done in Pasadena and then in Phoenix, rural Phoenix. She served continuously on the NSA from 1924 to 1951 with a 5-year hiatus to care for her ailing husband from 33 to 38 or 37. There was an interesting practice in 1924 when the NSA still was being developed. They not only elected their first assembly of 9, but they elected a second assembly of 9. So there could always be 9 members for every meeting, showing an alternate present if necessary. Millie was over and over convention delegate, mostly from California. She was very active in the convention. She served on tons of committees, as you might imagine. The National Teaching Committee, especially for the Western states, received a lot of her attention, as did the Geyserville Summer School. Assembly Development. I'll go back to Geyserville briefly. You know that she and Tom were very involved in building not only the auditorium, but the dormitories there. Her work on assembly development took her all over the United States and Canada to virtually almost every community, and sometimes at the last 11th hour, trying to save an assembly from falling back into group status. So she was quite active there. She was also very active during the 7-year plan, the first 7-year plan, second 7-year plan in Latin America, and was a member for many years of the Inter-American Committee. And then when she wasn't a member, she was still liaison. So she was one of the first sent to Latin America, to Mexico City, to form that assembly. She was in Wilmette when she lived there on Temple Committee, Program Committee, Feast Committee. She served on the International School Committee. She was a liaison often between the NSA and the Pioneer Development Committee. This was something very dear to her life. And while we mentioned already her first activity when she joined the faith was giving to the National Teaching Committee, her very last act on the day that she died was authorizing a deputization for a pioneer. And she was so weak at the time, she was unable to fully sign her name, just signing AM. And then just a few hours later, she died. So. An interesting committee she was serving on with Dorothy Baker was that of compiling a new prayer book. Now, you would think that would be a fairly easy job, but this task took 5 years. Millie was very exasperated by it. They first, of course, asked the Guardian about the content. They got that cleared. This just kind of went on and on because of the review committee and the title and so on and so forth. Anyway, at the end of all of this, Millie told privately to Horace Hawley, she said, I do know this, however, that I will never go on a committee again for this particular type of work. So this was just not her thing. Millie's services in Latin America were enormous, and they were very exhausting to her. She not only went there. Well, I'll get into that a little bit later. But there were two major trips, 1942 and 1946. You will recall in the cable that the Guardian, when he appointed her, he said this recent signal service that she had rendered. I believe that was probably her trip to Latin America that she had just completed that he was referring to. A very important service she gave was being the liaison between the NSA and the problems with Ahmad Sohrab. Ahmad Sohrab, as you know, became a covenant breaker. He first came to cook for Mirza Abul Fazl in 1904. He was also secretary and interpreter to Abdul Baha from 1912 to 1919. He officially immigrated in 1919 to the States, settling in Los Angeles, and he dabbled in writing a play about Mary Magdalene with an actress named Valeska Surratt. This play apparently didn't go too far, but they did sue Cecil B. DeMille for infringing on their rights when his film King of Kings was released in 1927, and the lawsuit was settled out of court in 1930. There was so much spiritual sickness surrounding the Guardian and, of course, the master before him. A handful of covenant breakers in Persia was agitating in the early days of the Shoghi Effendi's ministry to arrest the onward march of the faith and dishonor its founders. A similar situation was brought about in the West. It started as soon as the contents of the will and testament of Abdu'l Baha became known to the community. The first person to react was Ahmad Sohrab. One of the believers, Mrs. Nellie French, has recounted the reaction of Ahmad Sohrab when she communicated to him the contents of Abdu'l Baha's will. He was intensely agitated. His face turned black, and pacing back and forth, he explained, "This cannot be. Shoghi Effendi knows nothing about the cause. He was never with Abdu'l Baha as I have been. I am the one who should have been appointed." So Sohrab, as you know, started out trying to create his own sect based on the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the New Historical Society with Ruth White. This went on for quite a number of years. Millie, in her service to talk with Sohrab, said she tried to see the positive side of everyone. And she also commented, "I feel it is terrible when any individual judges another." And this holds good in my mind with NSA members as well. The Guardian, of course, told the NSA to completely ignore Sohrab, and that should these attacks continue and acquire serious importance, he would certainly advise them to take a definite and decisive action. Next slide, please. So Millie was teaching everywhere she could. And when she couldn't find someone who would not respond to the message, she would ask herself why. She taught on trains, on international trips, at home. That meant her servants, her community, her family, and her friends. On one international trip, they were returning to the United States and they docked for a while in Reykjavik, Iceland. Went into the Einar Johnson Museum, and there she encountered a lady who was quite interested in the message. Her name was Miss Holmfrue, Anadottir, and this is a lady that Millie stayed in touch with throughout the years. Martha Root continued by going there and working with her. Miss Arnadottir was the person who translated Baha'u'llah in the New Era into Icelandic. And curiously enough, Millie, at one point in 1947, asked the Guardian to pioneer to Iceland. But the Guardian said no, her place was in the United States, that she needed to help continue strengthen the fledgling local spiritual assemblies. Millie is also credited with being one of the first to work with the indigenous in America. In particular, it was the Omaha Indian tribe in Macy, Nebraska. She made a trip there. It was a very difficult trip for her in 1947. The person who went there and stayed as long as she could was Mary Stevenson. And anyway, this was quite an arduous task for all of the pioneers. Millie herself was a home front pioneer, and that is when she went in the early 40s after her husband had died in 1937. And she went to be with her brother Oscar and Lou, and was a home front pioneer in rural Phoenix. Next slide, please. This is a list I have been able to compile of Millie's family who became Baha'is. She herself in 1919, as she admits. She said in a letter to Ali Kuli Khan, there was a cousin in San Francisco who became a Baha'i. I have not yet identified this person. Her niece, Dorothy Ingelda Graff, was entranced with the faith. And one of the things that Millie would do is to bring these interested people to her home for long periods of study and deepening. Dorothy became a Baha'i in 1932, and her parents, Albert and Salome, became Baha'is in 1938. The Guardian assured Millie that her own husband had reached the Abha kingdom in 1940. You probably know that there were several messages from the Guardian when he assured Millie Tom was approaching. And it was through her services, her prayers, that he did reach, according to the Guardian, in 1940. We could talk more about that, but I won't spend time on that today. Her brother Oscar and his wife also have become Baha'is probably around 1940. Millie had an interesting conversation that was requested by Bertha's husband, Reverend Chester Harris. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he asked to know about the faith in 1943. She spent about 3 hours talking with him. Her brother Theodore, I believe, is the one who probably opposed her the most, although he's unnamed, and Shoghi Effendi also does not name him in the letter, but I believe that he is the one that probably questioned her a lot. Shall we move on, please? Okay. As an emissary for Shoghi Effendi, you probably know this story, how she went on her first pilgrimage and she wanted to learn about prayer from the Guardian. And instead he gave her a bundle of papers to read and study. And then he took her for a walk after a few days and asked her what did she think. And she said, well, frankly, Shoghi Effendi, I didn't understand anything. This is a letter that he wrote the 12th March 1923. You can read it in Baha'i Administration. And it not only outlines the importance of the covenant, but also the development of the assemblies and the rights and the responsibilities of the individual Baha'i. It goes into a great deal, it's several pages long. Now, I'm having trouble understanding the story that you've probably read, in which Millie says she got this, she got home, and that she immediately went to the National Convention where this letter was being read, and she was able to help the friends with their questions about it. I do not find from ship records that she arrived until after the convention, nor do I find her name mentioned in the convention report. But I do think the story's true. I do think she was able to help people understand the letter. I think that her memory, when she was telling this story to Mr. Fazey, probably confused it. It was late in life when she told the story to Mr. Fazey. So there's no doubt that this didn't happen. It didn't happen in 1923, I don't think, at the National Convention. On her second pilgrimage, she received locks of Baha'u'llah, which had been lovingly arranged by the Greatest Holy Leaf. And Millie herself had a silver box made for these locks. And then she took it back to the temple to be placed under the dome when one of the tablets of hair was read. So this was a service in 1938. The arduous service that she made was in 1942. You remember these are the war years, and so just trying to get to South America took 3 attempts to get out of the United States. There was a lot of suspicion. There was a lot of uncertainty about transportation. The Guardian had trusted her and had asked her to raise May Maxwell's monument in Buenos Aires, where she had died on 1 March 1940. With great difficulty, Millie finally got out of the United States and went to Chile, and then from there to Argentina. She had the foresight to not only purchase the lot, to have the marble made, but to purchase an adjacent lot. While she was there, she gave newspaper interviews, radio broadcasts, visited the friends. And when she left, she visited other Latin American countries. She doesn't talk about it, but at the time that she returned, I think there's just a brief mention that she had to go to Cleveland. And what had happened is that Dorothy Graff died. She had heart issues. And 3 weeks later, her father, Albert, Millie's brother, died also from a broken heart, I'm sure. So she had to go to Cleveland right at the end of this arduous trip and comfort Salome. And then in January, she had to go to an NSA meeting. So her grieving process was probably rather short because of all of her activities. She was, of course, appointed privately as a chief steward in 1946. Formally, she was a hand of the cause in the Holy Land from 1951 to 1962. And during that same time, she served as the vice president of the International Baha'i Council. One of her jobs there was to meet with dignitaries. A request not from Shoghi Effendi, but from May Maxwell herself was to take care of her daughter. This was a request late in May's life. I believe it happened in New York City when the 2 of them were there. And Millie thought it was strange at the time. But of course, then she realized that when the Guardian passed, she had been brought there really to take care. She'd been brought by the Guardian to take care of Ruhi Khanum. That was her place. Her service at the 4th Intercontinental Conference in Frankfurt was enormous. She was the representative of Shoghi Effendi, and of course, Shoghi Effendi did not tell her what to do or to say. So, being torn with grief over his passing, she nevertheless had no time to grieve. She laid the cornerstone of the European temple and placed holy dust from the shrine of Baha'u'llah, Frankfurt, Germany in 1960. And this again was very difficult for her. By then she was suffering tremendously from arthritis. At the 4th Intercontinental Conference, she was having to stand for 4 hours, something that was an amazing feat for someone who was not so well. You can see a picture of her with Ruhi Khanum at the let's see, I'm not sure when this was taken, I'm sorry. And the other picture is of her in the Holy Land. The next slide, please. Millie never considered herself to be a speaker or a writer. Indeed, she wrote to The Guardian and lamented her lack of talent in that area. And he told her not to worry about that her services were indeed very valuable. She, I believe, must have spoken. Usually when she would speak, she was speaking in the role as an NSA member or sending a message from The Guardian. So at Greenacre, 1926-28, Geyserville, Wilmette, several memorials, the conventions, the Frankfurt conference we've already mentioned, the laying of the foundation stone. And I've chosen 3 of her major writings. She didn't write that much, except letters. There are hundreds of her letters, which we are so fortunate to have preserved in the National Archives in the United States. The excerpt I read from you was from about the youth, was the Baha'i Youth Bulletin for the United States of America, Volume 2, Number 3. You may want to look that up. She recounts her story and her difficulties. Some of them, although you can read more about her difficulties in her letters, in a Baha'i shrine in Latin America, in the World Order magazine, December 1943. And of course, her beautiful tribute to Shoghi Effendi, which she wrote and read at the Frankfurt Intercontinental Conference. I'm going to ask my husband to read some of her words from a tribute to Shoghi Effendi.
The Guardian had a profound and innate humility. Whenever the faith was involved, he was fiery in its defense, king-like in the loftiness of his bearing, the authority with which he spoke. But as a human being, he was self-effacing, would brush aside our adulation and praise, turn everything we wish to shower on him towards the central figures of our faith. I can truly say that for a number of years, we who served him in the world's center seldom saw him smile, and very often he poured out to us his woes and confided some of the things he had passed through. I do not know in any great detail the day-to-day afflictions of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, but sometimes I wonder if they could have been any more heartbreaking than those of our beloved Shoghi Effendi. We are all, in a way, Shoghi Effendi's heirs. We have inherited his work. His plan is completely laid out. Ours is the task to fulfill it. We must, each of us, complete our share of the world crusade. This is the memorial we must build to our beloved Shoghi Effendi. Let us love him more now than ever before, and through the power of our love, attract his love to us and bring his blessing on our labors. Let us not fail him, for he never failed us. Let us never forget him, for he never forgot us.
Next slide, please. So in closing, these services to Hand of the Cause Amelia Collins are a brief overview of how she lived her life. She was the first to respond to the Guardian's call, whatever it was. She became a confidant to him, but she never abused this position. She felt unworthy to be a hand of the cause. We do not know what she wrote to the Guardian, but we do know what he wrote to her. January 14th, 1947. This is right after he appointed her hand of the cause. Dear and prized co-worker, with a heart overflowing with profound gratitude, I am now writing you these few lines to reaffirm the sentiments expressed lately on several occasions and in a number of telegrams. of heartfelt and unqualified admiration for your magnificent services, rendered in circumstances so exceptional and difficult as to make them doubly meritorious in the sight of God. You have acquitted yourself of the task I feel prompted to impose upon you in a manner that deserves the praise of the concourse on high. The high rank you now occupy, and to which no Baha'i has ever held in his own lifetime, has been conferred solely in recognition of the manifold services you have already rendered since the Master's passing, and is by no means intended to be a stimulus or encouragement in the path of service. Indeed, the character of this latest and highly significant service you have rendered places you in the category of the chosen 9, who, unlike the other hands of the cause, are to be associated directly and intimately with the cares and responsibilities of the guardian of the faith. I feel truly proud of you, am drawn closer to you, and admire more deeply than ever before the spirit that animates you. May the beloved reward you, both in this world and the next, for your truly exemplary achievements. Gratefully and affectionately, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It was very beautiful. For all of you who have joined us here today, we want to thank you for first and foremost coming here to clearwaterbaha'is.org, viewing the Zoom link, all of you on Zoom here, and joining the Zoom session. We appreciate it. All of you here who are joining us on YouTube and Facebook, if you appreciate this, we look forward to having our speaker here with us join again. And hopefully by the time you're watching this, maybe they'll have 2 more videos or so. So Dr. Harper, we really appreciate you coming back. We would love to have you speak on another subject, or if you want to delve in the same subject, we love that. With that being said, we wish to close out for today. And all of you who have been here with us, we wish you a beautiful Sunday. And most importantly, as we embark on this 9-year plan, we have Baha'is a 9-year plan from the Universal House of Justice to be outward looking in our communities. We hope all of you take this as inspiration, one of many heroines of the faith that have arisen and have brought us this far. We hope you all have a beautiful evening. Again, thank you.